Hi, my name is Leslie Bennett, and I am going to tell you about the life and ministry of John and Betty Stam. John Stam was actually born in 1907 in Paterson, New Jersey, into a Dutch immigrant family. It was a strong Christian foundational family from Holland. After his father actually initially came to Christ while learning English by reading an English translation of the Bible. His father founded the Star of Hope mission, and this was a ministry that was dedicated to outreaching to the New Jersey area, mainly in the poorer regions, with Christian literature and their testimonies. He grew up in a household, like I said, where the Bible was central, but he did end up struggling in his youth with doubt about whether he was supposed to follow in the footsteps of his siblings, follow in the footsteps of his parents, and what he needed to do about joining the ministry. So he ended up falling into drinking, and there was a turning point in 1922 after he came home from a night of drinking. He did stumble in. He met with his brother, and his brother ended up praying with him, and he came to know the Lord then. Betty, on the other hand, she was actually born earlier in 1906, and she was raised on the Chinese mission field. So her parents were missionaries already. They moved out to China when Betty was only 6 months old. They actually lost all of their possessions en route to China, so they actually thrived in Chinese culture, and that's what they grew up with. They grew up with a heart for mission because they didn't have all the material things that they were trying to bring with them to begin with. Her childhood poetry that she would always write reflected a lot of this, and the joy that she actually found in serving God. The two actually met, John and Betty, they met at the Moody Bible Institute, where they independently recognized their calling to serve China. They were part of a group called the China Bunch, and these were a bunch of students that were committed to actually serving China. They both graduated, Betty a year before John, and Betty went to China in 1931. John followed in 1932. And due to the Chinese international mission policies, they actually had to wait a year before they could get married. They actually married in October of 1933, and this was after a year of letters going back and forth between Betty and John, of where John asked Betty to marry him in these letters. They ended up settling in Suchicheng, where they started ministering by teaching scripture. They taught English, and they started building relationships with the Chinese people. Almost a year later, their daughter Helen was born in September. Then in December, they actually were serving in the Anaway Province during a time of a lot of civil unrest. The towns were being overturned by communist soldiers. There were rumors about this happening in their area, but they didn't believe that they were in any kind of danger at first, but they actually were. Soldiers entered their house in December, and they took Betty, John, and Helen captive. John was allowed to write a ransom note to the Chinese International Mission, and he closed it by saying, "May God be glorified in life or death," showing his unwavering faith. On the 8th of December, they did debate about killing Helen, but a local prisoner did offer his life in exchange for hers, and he was immediately executed. That next morning, John and Betty were then forced to parade through the village in their undergarments, and they were mocked, humiliated as they were being led to Eagle Hill. So Eagle Hill is where they ended up, the execution actually happened. They were forced to kneel, John first, and the soldier beheaded him with a sword immediately. Betty followed, kneeling beside her husband. She silently prayed before the execution, and she was beheaded the same way, with the same sword that beheaded John. Miraculously, Helen was found about 2 days later by a local Chinese pastor named Lo. He then smuggled her to a basket to safety, and she was eventually reunited with her maternal grandparents. Through their ministry was only 3 years, but their story did galvanize a generation of missionaries and believers. Their willingness to die for the gospel remains a reminder for the global church of the cost of discipleship and taking the gospel to the ends of the earth, regardless of the risk. So this is just a little bit about their martyrdom and their life, and it was very inspiring to learn about.